all. Welcome to Cross Politic Midweek Fix. It's good to be with you guys. And as you guys hopefully know by now, all the shows that are on our network,
all of them.
All of them.
Yeah.
We got, what do we got?
In the bullpen.
We got In the Bullpen.
Yeah, right.
We got George Grant. That's who I was. George Grant.
Yes.
And then we also got Uncle Gary started dropping a podcast with us.
Yeah.
Oh, and we got
Darren Doan.
we got some stuff coming
Doan.
from Darren.
And then if you guys, you probably noticed, especially in the app, you open up the app, you can see Fight Laugh Feast Canada.
Yeah, there's this different flag. You might not recognize it.
It's kind of foreign. Don't worry, it's in English. And we got a number of Canadian pastors starting to drop on our Fight Laugh Feast network. We got Dr. Aaron Rock.
Yep.
I
enjoyed
grown.
it.
Aaron's been awesome. We got our boys Nate Wright on Rebel Ministries.
They've been going for a long time.
They've been going for a long time.
Man. They know what they're doing.
They're just faithful,
Right.
And then, of course, Joe Boot started dropping his Ezra Institute podcast on our app.
That's awesome.
Guys, I know it's a lot of content, a lot to be paying attention to, but there's some just besides. I know you're here for Cross Politic, but besides Cross Politic, there's a lot of good stuff.
Get that app. Get that app. Download it and get that content. Yep. It's good for you and good to you. This episode, this midweek fix, is brought to you by the Armored Republic. The mission of Armored Republic is to honor Christ by equipping free men with tools of liberty necessary to preserve God-given rights. In the Armored Republic, there's no king but Christ.
Amen.
That's also true in the whole universe.
And Canada.
We are free craftsmen. Body armor is a tool of liberty. They create tools of liberty, and free men must remain ever vigilant against tyranny wherever it appears. God has given us the tools of liberty needed to defend the rights He's bestowed on us. Armored Republic is honored to offer you those tools. So visit them, and support us by going to Armored Republic, AR500 Armor.com. That's AR, the numbers 500armor.com.
And you Canadians who are tuning in, you might want to go there too. Just saying.
Hey, we are very grateful to have with us today on the Midweek Fixed Reverend Dr. Joe Boot. He's a Christian thinker, cultural apologist, and philosopher, founder and president of the Ezra Institute for Contemporary Christianity, and the founding pastor of Westminster Chapel. He's also the author of The Mission of God, which if you haven't gotten or read, What's Wrong with You People, and the forthcoming new book, King of Rulers.
Stop it.
Dr. Boot, thank you for joining us on Cross Politic again.
Great to be with you. Thanks for having me back, gents. Good to see you.
Yes, sir.
Absolutely. So Quebec just yesterday announced that they're going to tax all the unvaxxed. And when Blackface Trudeau heard about it, he said he was interested in hearing more. So what's going on in Canada exactly?
Yes, it's an interesting situation right now, to say the least. Things that people said could or would never happen have been happening for some time. And this is the latest in a round of draconian measures. The province of Ontario went back into a kind of lockdown after Christmas again. So schools were out, maximum gatherings inside 5 people, maximum outside 10.
Gosh. Wait, there's a limit on outside?
Yeah, 10 people, yeah.
But there's trees outside.
They can't catch COVID.
Restaurants for indoor dining are shut. Churches have been put to 50% in the province of Ontario. In Quebec, they're now closed. First, they introduced vax passports for churches.
Wow.
And then closed the churches altogether. And now their latest ploy is to introduce basically a fine for not being vaccinated, which they're calling a health tax, which I'd be more than happy with if they can just give me my taxes back and I can have private healthcare. But that's not allowed. That's illegal in Canada. There is no private healthcare in Canada.
Oh, man.
So this is now, I'm just waiting for them to add a health tax to all the clinically obese, the drug addicts, the alcoholics, those with sexually transmitted diseases and so on, so that we're not paying for them. But we're never likely to see that kind of a private system here anytime soon. So that's Quebec, which seems to, at the moment, be leading the pack in terms of the most draconian and totalitarian measures. And actually, our prime minister recently has called the unvaccinated, in a French interview, racist, most likely to be racist, misogynist, anti-science people, taking up space in the country. So it's all fun and games in Canada here right now.
Now, it seems to me that they have to kind of mandate this. They have to do this totalitarian play because you can't have any variables in it. Yeah. So if you mandate everyone to be vaxxed, or if you mandate all churches to shut down or whatever, they can say, "See, it worked."
Yeah. And then to whatever extent it doesn't work, they blame anybody that didn't comply.
That didn't comply because that totalitarian. They're trying this here in the United States. I mean, it's before the Supreme Court right now that businesses over 100 employees have to vax.
Right.
But nothing. I remember talking to my city council after all the craziness happened, and then like a year later, I asked some people in our city council, "Do you think what you did was right? Would you do it again?" And they're like, "Yeah, it worked. It worked." So
Joe, what strange brew has Canada been drinking for the last number of years to get to this place? This doesn't just happen overnight.
Soy milk.
What do you see? Like, take us on a brief history of Canada of the last few decades. I don't know. Yeah. How do we get here?
Well, it's interesting that Gabe referred to a kind of social experiment there and the control of the environment, because actually Canada has been referred to as a social experiment. And the first thing you need to have in any valid experiment is completely controlled conditions. And it does make you wonder sometimes right now whether they are looking to just be completely rid of any control group. Mm-hmm. But how do we get there? I think that, back in, if you look at some of the founding era debates in Canada around the Lord's Day Act in 1904, 1905, thereabouts, you can actually read the speeches of Canadian senators calling upon their fellow senators to apply the law of God to the nation, arguing that we uphold the details of God's law with respect to murder and perjury and these kinds of things. Why are we not upholding it with regard to the Sabbath? And invoking the word of God and saying that we will go down as a nation if we set the law of God at variance and reject the first or second table of the law, we will end up going down as a nation. That's what they were saying just over 100 years ago. Those were liberal senators. Then, just like the rest of the West, there was the experience of World War I and World War II, and the development of a much more liberal paradigm, especially influenced by France and the Nordic countries, and eventually in the late 1960s with actually Justin Trudeau's father, Pierre Trudeau. He was actually friends with all kind of very interesting characters around the world like Castro and others. And he brought about, really, I would say, the end of old Christian Canada. And at the end of the 1960s, we saw abortion and homosexual practice and all those things become decriminalized. And then in 1982, there was something called the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which basically meant that Canada was no longer governed by the British North America Act, which tied us much more closely to Britain. And we had this written constitution like the Nordic nations, only without the kind of robust protections more robust protections that the US Constitution provides you. So there's caveats in our Constitution. And this last 2 or 3 years has actually been the first major test of the Section 2 Charter rights and freedoms. And basically our Charter of Rights and Freedoms has been suspended, seemingly almost indefinitely. We can't travel freely. We're under tremendous coercion to take a state-mandated medical treatment. We can't enter certain premises without showing papers and so on. So it's been actually a fairly fast journey since the end of World War II, but the shocking speeding up has happened in the last 10 to 15 years, where radical progressivism and the statist agenda of the Canadian politicians and ideology that has taken over a secular, humanistic, I would say neo-pagan worldview is now dominating both the intellectual and political landscape, and there's very little pushback at all. And I think we're going to touch in a minute on the passage of Bill C-4, which was actually fast-tracked through both the House and the Senate by the Conservatives.
Yeah.
So
It's interesting to me that you start off by connecting the fall of Canada to just toying with or listening to partial parts of God's word and not all of God's word. Mm-hmm. It started there. And I think how many denominations, how many people in personal lives where you see them just listen to part of the scriptures and not the other part, right. And then 5 degrees down the road you're 5 miles apart.
Well, it was about 1980 when they actually in the end overturned the Lord's Day bill, the Lord's Day Act, and following that with this new progressive liberal charter, which the design of which was to actually give the state ultimate power,
right? Yeah.
To create a society that was much more in line with the liberty, fraternity and egalitarian agenda of the French Revolution than the constitutional freedoms of Britain. And the Lord's Day Act was overturned, and then soon enough you've got the so-called gay marriage. And we've gone from basically the late 1960s to 2022. You've gone from sodomy is a criminal offense to if you counsel somebody to order their lives in terms of a normative understanding of human identity and sexuality, you are a criminal and you will go to prison for up to 5 years.
Right. Yeah.
Dr. Boot, I just have to ask, in America, we have people who are not Christians, but because of the saturation of the society, they see the stuff that's happening here and they are grabbing their guns and loading up their guns and they're pushing back legally every kind of which way they can.
Buying body armor.
We buy from AR500. But the question I have is it's interesting to see the way the government's going. I'm not too surprised about that because it seems every government in the world is going that way. So that's not too surprising. There's kind of a peer pressure from governments to do this. What's surprising to me, though, and what I don't understand, are the people. The people in Canada are in 40 years, have you lost the kind of people that even...
I've mentioned this several times when I'm talking to Canadians. I was bringing it up with you, Joe, but when I saw that video of that lady cop arresting that kid on the ice rink skating during 2020, I knew you guys were screwed. I mean, they're taking hockey away. They're taking hockey away
they're letting them. Right, and they're letting them. We're going to let you take hockey away?
And there were just people standing on the side just like videotaping it and watching. And you're like, you're going to let her just arrest that kid for ice skating. Ice skating outside.
And so I guess what are the people made of now? Do they even know that they're going to have an Auschwitz right here in Northern America? Where are the people at? What's going to wake them up? I'm just perplexed about the place of the Canadian mind right now in relationship to all of this.
Well, first, we, of course, don't have the protections of a Second Amendment like our southern neighbor. So there are strict limits there. Second of all, it's interesting that if you look at the Commonwealth countries like Australia and Canada and New Zealand, that were, formerly had this tremendous heritage of the gospel and freedom and liberty. They've been the ones who've almost been most aggressive in their attempts to shut down freedom and liberty. And I think that is to do with the judgment of God on the nation for its apostasy from the gospel, for the privileges that we've enjoyed here. The quality of the Canadian people is definitely declining. There's no question about that. And that is to do with the radical changes in the social order, in the family, in education, and in our courts. And we also have a complacent population. People have moved from all over the world to a place like Canada for the lifestyle, for the in a certain sense the pace of life, the standard of living, the cottage, the golf, the boat in the Canadian lakes, some of these opportunities. And they've been satisfied for the most part with bread and circuses during this time. And that was, of course, what was at the heart of the decline of the Roman Empire. As long as we're entertained, the state gives us our handouts, we're promised cradle to grave security. There isn't this widespread. Now, of course, as you guys know, there are pastors and leaders who are standing up and resisting, they are few and far between. Those are the exception, not the rule. And it is a relatively very small group that are willing to stand up and resist these things. We don't seem to value liberty and freedom. It seems that we prefer servitude in the name of safety and security than freedom and liberty. Freedom and responsibility are something that simple people who don't have the gospel and the Lord's table and the word of God in their hearts are afraid of. Yeah, and that's what we don't want freedom and responsibility. We want safety and security from a false god called the state. And I think that is at the root of the problem and the decline of the character of our people.
And because of that type of attitude, now you get something like Bill C-4, which comes into play, which was amazing to me, by the way, because I don't know what royal assent is, but it sounds like everybody agreed. And I just, how in the world is this C-4 pass with royal assent? And what is that? Assent.
Yes. So basically that's just a constitutional rubber stamp from the Governor General representing the Queen. The reality is the Queen doesn't have, that Elizabeth II doesn't have the constitutional authority. She would create a massive constitutional crisis if she stood up to those things. So that's a hangover. Royal assent means that the bill has now finally it's gone through the lower house, it's gone through the Senate, and it's received royal assent, which is part of our constitutional process. And it went into law on January 7th, and our own Prime Minister was tweeting out on the 7th. This is almost unprecedented. Now this wicked practice was now illegal across Canada, reminding everybody in his personal Twitter account about his draconian law. But C4 was basically the slight reworking of C6. C6 was the same law essentially, but it dropped because there was a general election here back in the fall. And so it was reintroduced to C4, only it got worse in the break, because with C6, if you were a consenting adult, even though you couldn't advertise so-called conversion therapy or promote it, a consenting adult could request their pastor, a counselor, a therapist to help them with unwanted same-sex desire or gender dysphoric conditions. Now that's illegal as well. Even a consenting adult can't request it or seek it. You can't provide it, I should say, to any consenting adult. Wow. So it got worse. And what was astonishing is that in neither the lower house, the Commons, nor in the Senate, nor at the level of the Governor General, was there any resistance to the bill. So the bill was actually, there was a fast track motion by the Conservatives to fast track this bill through without scrutiny, without amendment, without change, just as the government, the Trudeau government had wanted it. And not a single MP, not one, not even a single professing Christian MP voted against this bill. So it's like being in a fascistic one-party state.
Wow. Now, I heard that there was a couple MPs that were not able to attend who would have voted against it.
Yeah, I mean, that's been said. There's been a couple of apologies from a couple of MPs. The reality is, though, is that the fact that this bill was coming to the floor was communicated ahead of time, and people could have expressed by proxy their disapproval, their no vote, or in the House that day when the Speaker says, "Are there any objections?" and there were the House was full of conservative MPs, including some professing Christians. They could have stood up and said, no, I don't support this bill, and I cannot vote yes to this. And that would have put a spanner in the works. That didn't happen. And so we are in a situation that the frightening nature of the situation is that we so easily and so quickly were ready to surrender such a foundational and fundamental freedom, because this bill is only one way, don't forget.
Right.
So not only does the preamble to the bill take a fundamentally theological and religious stance by reducing the Bible to myth.
Right.
It actually says that the biblical, the normative human sexuality is a myth.
Right.
And actually queer theory, pretty much developed by our European intellectuals in the middle to the latter part of the last century and popularized by people like feminist, lesbian, Jewish American scholars like Judith Butler, is now the law of the land.
Right.
You got an anti-scientific pagan idea is replaced and replaces scripture, and which is now considered mythology. That's what it calls it. If you engage in even trying to reduce or suppress somebody's non-normative sexual desires, then you are engaging in conversion therapy, and you can go to prison. So this is really a terrifying situation now, and it indicates the direction in which Canada seems to want to move. And the fact that there was no resistance to it at the political level is obviously profoundly disturbing.
But Joe, the Gospel Coalition is telling you to chill out, man. Just
the Gospel Coalition of Canada.
They released an article this last week. Toby reported on Daily News Brief on Tuesday, and they're basically saying, hey, I think you're a little worked up, and this hasn't been settled in the courts.
Overreacting.
You're overreacting, and I think you are.
Well, yeah, we were overacting when we said it wasn't 2 weeks to flatten the curve.
Bars.
And here we are 2 years later. And the churches across the nation are facing, still in the midst of restrictions and mask mandates and limitations, and in some provinces, even complete closure. And of course, this was said way back, back in the early part of the 21st century, when same-sex marriage, civil partnerships, same-sex marriage, these things came in. Oh, no, it's not a slippery slope. No, peace.
Yeah.
Nothing to see here. Don't worry, et cetera, et cetera. Well, look, the fact is the courts have already demonstrated their attitude towards Christians with appealing to their religious freedom on these issues. The Supreme Court of Canada ruled in the case of Trinity Western University, who wanted a law school, that in a law school, in a university where there is a lifestyle commitment, a lifestyle document that commits the student to a biblical standard, whoever they are, during their studies at the university, and they weren't allowed their law school. The Supreme Court has said you can't have a genuinely distinctly Christian institution in Canada that upholds Christian values. They've already made their ruling on this. The notion that the courts are going to come to the rescue of counselors and therapists or pastors on this, who are counseling or teaching. Don't forget, this applies to parents as well. If you're a parent in Canada, you've got a 12 or 13-year-old struggling with same-sex desire or gender dysphoria, and you take them to your church pastor for a series of sessions about biblical sexuality, that's a crime. It's a crime for the parent, not just the pastor, because you would cause somebody to undergo conversion therapy. Right. Now, pastors who think that this is now, it's the law of the land. It's not an overreaction. This is illegal.
Wow.
Now, it's true that it's possible for any law in a Western democracy to be challenged in the courts, but it is the law of the land. And I don't hold out any real hope that based on the track record of the Supreme Court, we are going to see a bill passed unanimously by all parties in both the lower house and the Senate. You expect a liberal judiciary of government appointees to be standing up for the freedoms and liberties of Christians and the church in this. I don't think so.
So maybe with COVID, okay, let's just say that I could see some of the pastors in Canada seeing COVID and just saying, you know what, we're going to follow the guidelines. We're not going to make a big fuss about this. And some of the churches out there that decide to stay open, they want to separate themselves from them because, you know, you guys are just missing it on this. And there isn't any clear admiration, teaching on scripture about how to handle COVID. Fair enough. But conversion therapy, every church in Canada has to be flipping out about this one, though. This is clear. This is right at the home of their counseling, their Sunday morning services, their every Tuesday Bible studies, everything that they do, that they're called to do, and calling men to be men, women to be women. This is right at the heart of their message. Every church is flipping out about this right now, right?
Well,
stop.
You would hope so. You would think so, but tragically, that isn't the case. In fact, there were regional bylaws to this effect in different provinces already. This is a federal bill added to the criminal code. So this is the government taking out the biggest stick that's available to it, the criminal code. But there were already bylaws in various provinces. And gents, I had already had requests from certain churches before I came to speak, even if I was just using a church building for a conference, to supply my notes and my PowerPoint in advance so that it could be scrutinized to make sure the church wasn't going to fall afoul of one of these local bylaws.
Wow.
So that's already happened. No, for the most part, churches and church movements are relatively quiet on this. We have launched, as you probably know, a campaign. The Ezra Institute recommended to a group of pastors that we have an annual anniversary preach on the Sunday following the passage of this bill into law, to preach on biblical sexuality. And we do believe that several hundred churches are going to be participating in that this coming Sunday.
Good.
To preach on biblical sexuality, which is something. And Liberty Coalition Canada, an advocacy group that got started last year, has been promoting that campaign. And actually, you Americans, our American friends, are much quicker to pick up on that and start running with it. You would think that there'd be absolute outrage and resistance everywhere from the church. Unfortunately, the best you get is a couple of limp-wristed articles on the TGC site for the most part. Now, there are some faithful pastors quietly getting on with being faithful, and there may be many unsung heroes in quiet corners out there. But in terms of the public witness, to stand publicly against this is to experience a significant degree of isolation, even in the church. You've got some churches who say, well, we've got to go a third way, or playing it down and saying this isn't really going to be an issue. Don't worry. The homosexual minister who happens to be promoted this bill and advanced it, he doesn't want to go after churches. I mean, here's the thing. They couldn't produce any evidence that these so-called coercive practices were happening anywhere in Canada. This bill was never targeted at some maverick therapist electrocuting people in his basement for their sexual orientation. This is targeted specifically at the Christian world and life. Yep. It's targeted at Christian pastors and churches and counselors and those that are trying to help those with these problems, these struggles, trapped in these sins. And don't forget, this law now actually discriminates against those people, because what it says is specifically is that if you are somebody struggling and trapped in sexual promiscuity, sexual perversion in one of these areas, and you want help, you cannot get it. It's illegal for you to get it. So if you want to move away from homosexual practice, trans confusion, or anything like that, that's illegal. But if you want counseling and help to transition to being as a man to being a woman, or a woman to being a man, or to become transsexual or an outed homosexual, you can get all the help, all the counsel that you want with that. Right. So this is an anti-conversion bill. It's not an anti-conversion therapy bill. It's an anti-conversion law.
That's right.
And it's the first major one in a Western country, I would say.
It's not which conversion therapy you're going to be preaching. Right. It is which. Precisely. It's not if. Joe, I don't want people to miss this either, but this next coming Sunday, a bunch of pastors in Canada and the U.S. are going to be preaching basically against the C4 bill and bringing the gospel into that. I know Toby's joining this Sunday. Pastor Wilson's joining. I know there's a bunch of pastors in our denomination, the CREC.
Didn't MacArthur
joining. MacArthur sent an email out. Yeah. And I think if you're a pastor and you're listening, I would encourage you to kind of think about maybe joining this Sunday.
It's Wednesday night. There's still time to rewrite that message.
Yeah. And the reason why this is important, I think, for American churches to join in this is because getting a tidal wave of messages against this is important. But I also think that Canadian politicians actually do see what happens in the U.S., and it does affect them to some degree. Joe, do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, that's actually very true. It also affects the churches. You probably noticed that some Christian leaders up here have been fairly sensitive to criticism of them from American evangelicals, and puts some fire under their feet. And I think that's really important that happens. And it's not just the churches. Yes, politicians do notice and do take note of the response stateside, south of the border, and the more public exposure that can be given to this totalitarian piece of legislation that will be threatens to put Christian parents and pastors and counselors in prison for teaching, for instructing, counseling in a normative Christian lifestyle. That reaction down south will have an effect up here. There are a few churches too that are going to be reading a statement, or read a statement last Sunday, or may read it this Sunday as well. So there is some reaction here, but nowhere near enough. And the more help we can have from the United States in drawing public attention to this, I mean, that's what we do internationally, isn't it? If China is doing something, if we're seeing bills in Scandinavia, exactly, we try and draw attention. That produces international pressure. And the Canadian government will not like that. They will not like the exposure of this as basically destroying religious freedom in Canada.
Joe, thanks for that. And before we finish, we do want to talk about your new book, King of Rulers. And somehow, I don't think that's unrelated to all of this.
No.
So tell us about this new book and why did you write it?
And why we don't have a copy.
And John Cooper does.
Oh, he does.
What's up?
You're a little upset about that.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so the title, Toby, is Ruler of Kings. It's okay. Ruler of Kings.
Thanks,
toward
Gabe.
a Christian vision of government.
Ruler
of Kings.
Got it.
Toward a Christian vision of government. And it's coming out very soon. You can pre-order a copy. I know, Gabe, I think you're going to put the link to where people can pre-order their copy. It's coming out real soon.
EzraPress.ca. They could go there, but we'll give the direct link later. But EzraPress.ca is where you can go get it pre-ordered.
Yes, thank you.
Yep.
One or two pre-release PDFs, yes, were released to James White and
James
and John Cooper, who asked.
Now y'all made me really angry. I'm like,
it's not too late. It's not too late to give us an endorsement. It's not too late. So I'll get one. I'll get one down to you sharpish.
Awesome.
Well, are you on James White's network? I was just wondering because I would love to promote it on the Daily News. But I'm just, anyways. Go ahead, Doc. I'm sorry. I'll deal with my hurt feelings by myself.
Well, I'm regularly on his podcast periodically.
That's not helping. That's not helping.
Sorry, but we love you guys as much. We love you guys as much. I promise.
He needs it. He's new. He needs it.
So basically, the book is opens by talking about the cult of the expert that has taken over the Western culture now. That's been on vivid display the last 2 years, and the utopian ideology that grows out of that as a sort of technocratic order for society. It goes on. I delineate the development of secularism and the secularist illusion of neutrality. and the history of sort of church-state relations in the West. And then the book sort of, the sort of summit of the book is the development of the Christian response to where we are now, as I critique what I call the heresy of democracy in the French Revolutionary sense, and talk about the authority of Christ, and then try and paint a picture of the scriptural vision of sphere sovereignty and the lordship of Jesus Christ over every area of life. So it's an attempt to take a very concrete and up-to-date look at exactly where we are and how the Christian can be articulating a robust, strong world and life view response. What is a scriptural Christian view of government that's consistent with the gospel? Gabe mentioned that this whole sexuality marriage thing is a gospel issue because the Bible begins with a wedding. God describes his relationship with Israel as a marriage. The Son, God the Son, comes to us. It's the Holy Family, Father and Son. So God reveals himself in familial terms. Jesus' first miracle is at a wedding. His relationship with his church is described as a marriage, and history ends in the marriage supper of the Lamb. So if you don't understand marriage, you miss the cosmological key to the universe. It's central to the gospel. In the same way, authority and lordship. What I try and argue is that we tend to think of the concept of heresy as an ecclesiastical thing only. But actually, people's heretical ideas often only come to full expression when they start talking about politics or social order. Suddenly, the Jesus who is Lord in the church isn't Lord in the state. He's not Lord in the family. He's not Lord elsewhere. Well, actually, that's heretical. And so I expand on that idea and help us recognize that this is a core gospel of the kingdom issue. And the reason we're in the mess we're in Canada and across the West is because we haven't grappled with this. So really appreciate you guys letting me say something about it. And I apologize for my remiss attitude in not sending any PDF.
You forgiven.
Doc, we messing with you. I can't tell you.
I want absolution now live on this podcast.
I can't tell you, listening to you talk about this book has me so excited. I was reading, I think it's so important right now. I was reading a book called After Virtue, and he posed a question in the beginning of the book saying if the society as we know it right now collapsed, where we're at, and we had to rebuild it, do we have the people that understand basically what builds a society to flourish and to grow? And I thought about that for a second. I said, no. Yeah. We don't have those faculties anymore because we're so biblically literate, and then understanding how all that Bible applies to every facet in our society, And so I'm so grateful to hear about this book, man. I can't wait to get a copy of it.
When you were talking about Bill C-4 being a direct attack on the Christian life and worldview, I think that was spot on.
Yep.
But the thing that I think many Christians and many pastors miss is that more than that, Bill C-4 and bills like it are direct attacks on Jesus.
That's right.
That's right.
They're attacking us by proxy.
Yeah.
We're his people, and so they're attacking us. They're attacking biblical Christianity, but what they're actually attacking is Jesus and his power to change sinners.
Yep.
And I think that's the thing is that people don't get is when you pass bills like this and people say, well, I don't want to get into politics. Look, politics just walked in your door.
That's right.
I mean, they're
how you parent your kids inside your home.
But they're attacking Christ, and that's why it's when you refuse to say then this is the gospel, this is the truth. It really is a heresy. So I'm excited to
that's a critical point, actually, Toby. That you see, because man cannot strike out directly at God, nobody can pull Christ down off his throne out of the heavens. Yeah. So to strike at God, man strikes at God's image.
That's right.
His image bearer.
Right.
And the attempt to remake man is of course an attempt to make an idol, to bear the image of something else, to reflect an idol, to reflect the will purpose of an idol, of a false god, to society and culture. Karl Marx understood this. He said the key to the Holy Family is the earthly family, and to destroy the former, you must destroy the latter in theory and in practice. He recognized that the only way to pull down God, the Christian God and the Christian worldview, was to strike at God's image in the family and in human sexuality. And that's what this is. It's absolutely an attack on God himself, to strike at God, by an attempt to destroy his image bearer, male and female. And this is what we are. This is what we're now very much up against.
Dr. Joe Boot, thank you so much, man. Appreciate you.
That's good.
Appreciate you fighting out there. EzraPress.ca is where we're going to be able to find Ruler of Kings, or you can just look inside the notes and you'll have it there too. So if you're single, get married. If you're married, have kids. And if you have kids, go baptize them. Until Sunday, love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Love your neighbor as yourself. Go fight, laugh, and feast. This is Cross Politic. Hey, Doc, I'm going to need that quote from